This video is going to help you walk through the steps for drawing some of the important organic molecules and reactions between those organic molecules. Okay, the first one we're going to start with is glucose. Glucose is a monosaccharide, okay, it's one of our carbohydrates, and its formula is C6H12O6. And it's important to remember that for about, a billion reasons. But one of those reasons is because it helps us to draw it. Now, glucose has 6 carbons, and that's important because that tells me that it has 6 sides. Don't draw this next part. I just want to show you something. When I say 6 sides, I mean that it has a ring shape, okay? And its ring shape is a hexagon, 6 sides, okay? So I always start with these sides, okay? So these sides here represent bonds, and I go ahead and draw those in, and I leave the corners blank. There's a good reason for that, obviously. Okay, so you can go ahead and draw in your 6 sides. Now, if life was fair and everything made sense, then each of these 6 carbons would go in each of these blank spaces. But this is IB biology, nothing's fair. So instead, only 5 of these 6 carbons go in here, okay? And they go here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And the 6th one kind of gets put on as a chimney here. So this shape to me looks some kind of crazy house with a chimney. All right, so what goes in here? Well, that would be one of the oxygens. So the first step that I always do when I'm drawing glucose, I draw my 6 sides, okay, I fill it in with my 6 carbons, and then I fill in that empty space with an oxygen. Okay, so step number 1 in drawing an organic molecule is to draw the carbon backbone first. I've done that. The next step is to add in any kind of functional groups, like an alcohol, a carboxyl, an R group, whatever, okay? And for us, in glucose, that functional group is an OH group. So onto each carbon, I'm going to draw an OH group. Now, it doesn't matter how you draw these, like if they're pointing down or if they're pointing inwards. For our purposes, it doesn't matter. When you take organic chemistry in college, when you're like an important person, it totally matters. But for now, we can kind of skip that. I also want you to note that this carbon is bonded to the oxygen, okay? That's because what's really going on and what we don't necessarily need to draw is this carbon is bonded to the oxygen, which is also bonded to the to the H. So we're not drawing the bond between the O and the H. You can, that's totally fine. But the reason why it can't be like this, C and then an H and then an O, is because hydrogen can't make 2 bonds. Hydrogen can only make 1 bond. I'm sure you remember that from chemistry because you're amazing. Okay, oxygen on the other hand makes 2 bonds. So if we draw it like this, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, we need to draw it to where the carbon is connected to the oxygen and then connected to the hydrogen like this. Okay, so you're going to notice that I didn't draw an OH group here. That's because this carbon, he's kind of busy. He's connected to another carbon. Okay, so I'm going to draw that OH group here. Okay, so let me do a quick check. I've drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. Okay, I got my 6 carbons. That's great. I've drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 oxygens. I'm amazing. Okay, I've drawn all 6 oxygens. I can just tell by looking at this that I haven't drawn these 12 hydrogens. So where do they go? Well, they fill in wherever carbon, or oxygen for that matter, I guess, is missing a bond. So we know that carbon can form 4 bonds. Well, in this carbon, 1, 2, 3 of those bonds is already spoken for. So I'm going to draw in my 4th bond here, and I'm going to fill in that 4th bond with a hydrogen. So now I've fulfilled all of carbon's 4 bonds. Okay, here's a carbon with only 1, 2, 3 bonds. I'm going to fill that one in with a hydrogen. Same here. Same here. And here. Now, this carbon is only forming 1,2 bonds at the moment, so that means I have 2 hydrogens to fill in. Okay, so let's see how I've done on drawing my hydrogens. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I've got everything there. Notice that I keep doing these self-checks. I'm checking to make sure I have the right numbers of things. I'm checking to make sure that things are forming the correct number of bonds. Hydrogen only forms 1 bond. Carbon forms 4 bonds. Oxygen always forms 2 bonds. And if you've passed all those checks and your formula matches and you have some kind of a coherent shape that doesn't look like Shrek, then you are good to go. Okay, so take a couple minutes to practice how to draw this. I highly recommend, even though I know some of you aren't going to listen to me, that you draw each molecule at a time. Don't just go through and draw an oxygen a billion times and then connect it to a carbon and draw that a billion times. I would practice drawing a whole molecule once, and then a whole molecule again, and then a whole molecule again. And there's my little bit of life advice for glucose. Okay, so now that you've practiced how to draw glucose, let's see if we can do ribose. So ribose is C5H10O5. Okay, so notice that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, okay, which is going to be the case for all of our monosaccharides. And it has 5 carbons, so realistically it should be some kind of 5-sided shape, okay, like a pentagon. So I follow the same practice as I did with carbon. So first I'm going to draw in my sides, which again are going to represent bonds. And then I'm going to fill in my carbons, okay? Okay, so we're again going to find that carbon is going to fill in all of the corners except one, okay? This empty corner here is filled again by oxygen, so kind of like in glucose. So I remember ribose is looking like a house. At the top of the house is the oxygen, and now I only have 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons accounted for. I gotta find a 5th one. I'm again going to make a carbon chimney. So this legit looks like a house with a carbon chimney, and oxygen is at the top of the roof. So I've drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons. There they are. So I can kind of check that off of my to-do list. Now I'm going to go through and fill in my functional groups, my OH groups, just like in glucose. So I'm going to draw one in here, here, and here. This carbon is a little busy making buddies with this carbon, so I'm going to leave him alone. And here. Okay, so again, notice that the carbon is bonded to the oxygen each time, okay, and then the hydrogen is bonded to the oxygen. All right, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 oxygens accounted for. I'm dealing. Let's move on to hydrogens. So carbon has to form 4 bonds. Fill in your 4th bond for all of your carbons, or in this case, your 3rd and 4th bonds with hydrogens, okay? So let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hydrogens. That's awesome. Okay, my shape is looking good. I see carbon is making 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. No matter what carbon I look at, it's making 4 bonds. Every hydrogen is only making 1 bond. Every oxygen is making 2 bonds. And that, friends, is how you draw ribose. Take a couple minutes to practice drawing this a few times. Again, I recommend that you draw the whole molecule at once and then try to draw it again. Don't just draw pieces and parts. That does your brain no good. Okay, next up I'm going to draw a fatty acid. So remember, fatty acids are part of triglycerides. So in triglycerides, you're going to have a molecule of glycerol. More on that another time. And then you're going to have 1, 2, 3 fatty acid chains. All we're drawing in this generalized fatty acid is what one of these fatty acid chains would look like. Okay, so we're not going to draw all 3 and we're not going to draw glycerol. I'll talk a little bit later why we're calling this a general fatty acid. All right, but fatty acids in general, have two ends, okay? And on one end, you have what's called a carboxyl group. Okay, so actually maybe I should write that up here somewhere. A carboxyl group is a carbon with a double bonded oxygen and an OH group. Okay, so this is what we call a carboxyl group, and you'll often hear me call it COOH. And I list those O's separately because one of those oxygens is double bonded to carbon, and one is part of a hydroxyl or functional group here. Okay, so we have our carboxyl group, COOH. Okay, and on the other end, I'm going to leave some space in the middle for a second. On the other end, we have what's called a methyl group. Okay, so methyl is going to be a CH3 group that looks a little like this. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so methyl group, CH3. You may remember talking about methane. Methane is CH4, so it looks something like this. Carbon with 4 hydrogens. That is not the same as methyl, but it might not be a bad idea to kind of make an association there in your brain, because methane is C with 4 H's, methyl is C with 3 H's, so they're kind of the same. I don't know about methamphetamines. Sorry, that's another class. All right, so again, I'm going to leave some space in here, and I'm going to draw a methyl group on the other end. So CH3. Now, is it okay if you drew the carboxyl group over here and the methyl group over here? Yes, that's totally fine. It's just one is on one end and one is on the other. So we need to remember that molecules are three-dimensional. Sometimes they flip-flop around. It's okay. Okay? All right. Now, each of these carbons is only making, at the moment, 3 bonds. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So it's going to make another bond. Both of them are going to make another bond, and this time with a carbon. Okay, so that fulfills the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 bond requirement for carbons. But this guy's looking a little lonely here. Okay, so this guy is going to have hydrogens. I'm going to fill those empty parking spots in with hydrogen. Okay, and now I'm going to do something weird and wacky and funny. Okay, and I'm going to draw parentheses around here. Okay, and I'm going to draw an N. What just happened to our life? Okay, well, this N stands for number. Okay, and so that means I can have a variety of these groups, okay? So maybe one fatty acid is going to have a methyl, a carboxyl, and 10 of these groups in the middle. Maybe one is going to have a methyl, a carboxyl, and 25 of these groups together, okay? So if I take a look at this molecule down here, here's the carboxyl group. And again, it's okay that they drew it on the other side. Okay, here's my methyl group. Okay, and then this guy has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so its N number would be 8. And you don't really have to remember that, okay, but what I'm trying to show you is, okay, methyl, carboxyl, and then a certain number of these groups. If we take a look at this one, okay, now here's the carboxyl, here's the methyl group. So this one has a total of, holy crap, a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 of these groups in the middle. Okay, so every fatty acid is going to be identical. Methyl group on one end, carboxyl group on the other end, and then some number of these carbon groups in the middle. So take a couple minutes to practice how to draw this guy. It's worth noting, however, that if you are ever asked to draw a fatty acid with a certain number of these groups here in the middle, that you should be able to do that, okay? Draw your ends, and then you would know how many of these to stick in the middle. Okay, next up is a generalized amino acid. Remember, amino acids are those subcomponents of polypeptides, and if they're folded into the correct shape, then we can call them proteins, but more on that on another day. Okay, so here's how I'm going to start with an amino acid. We have a central carbon atom. On one end, we have a carboxyl group. So that is a COOH. Okay, so a carboxyl group includes a carbon. So that's why I had to draw another one over here. A central carbon followed by a carboxyl group, COOH. And on the other end, we have what's called an amine group. And an amine group is an NH2 group. Okay, so amine belongs with amino acid. Okay, and that's going to look like this. Okay, so NH, NH2. Okay, now, so far this is looking pretty good. Nitrogen can make 3 bonds, so there's 1, 2, 3. Hydrogen can make 1 bond, that's looking good. This carbon is making 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. This carbon is looking a little sad. Okay, so we're going to draw in, it's 2 other bonds here. One of them is going to be filled by a hydrogen, and the other one is filled in by what's called an R group. Now, R is not an element, okay? So I can go ahead and circle this, okay? That doesn't mean anything special. It just kind of tells my brain that this is not an element, okay? So quick question for you. Would it have been okay if I drew the hydrogen on top and the R group on the bottom? Yes, that would just be like the having the amino acid flip upside down. That's okay. Molecules move around in 3 dimensions, so that's totally fine. If you want to draw your R group down here just to be difficult, you go for it, okay? It's just that one of those bonds has a hydrogen and one of those bonds has an R group. Okay, so here's what I'm talking about here. So all amino acids are going to be exactly the same. Okay, so here in these diagrams, the black and red part is the carboxyl group, and the blue and white part is the amine group. All 20 of the amino acids that occur in the nature are exactly the same. The only exception is the R group. Okay, so for some of them, that R group can be as simple as a hydrogen atom. For others, that R group is a really complex set of molecules, okay? So all amino acids have the same structure with some kind of weird different attachment as their R group. So take a couple minutes to draw some practice amino acids. Okay, so next we're going to practice what molecules look like when they come together, okay? And those are condensation reactions. First thing you need to do is to kind of separate your drawing space into a before and after scenario. So bonding is an event, okay? It's going to have a before picture and an after picture. So first I'm going to start off with 2 molecules of glucose. Okay, so wow, that's bad. Okay, so there's 1. Okay, and so now I have 2 molecules of glucose, believe it or not. Okay, hopefully yours looks better than mine. There's 1 and there's 2. So when we talk about a condensation reaction, okay, what that means is it's going to remove a molecule of water, okay? And here is where I'm going to find my molecule of water. How does that work, you say? Because water's formula is H2O. Well, I'm going to be using the 2 hydrogens, there's my H2, and 1 of those oxygens. And when I do that, okay, don't do this part, just let me show you what's happening here. Okay, if I use those 2 hydrogens, so those 2, and I use this oxygen to make my water, okay, then I'm left with kind of a conundrum, because now this oxygen is only forming 1 bond. You've stolen its hydrogen friend, okay? And this carbon is only making 1, 2, 3 bonds. You've stolen the group that it was bonded to here. Well, we can't have that. Oxygen needs 2 friends. Carbon needs 4 friends. So the way we're going to solve that problem is by having carbon share this oxygen with this carbon. So that kind of solves our problem, because now this carbon would be making 1, 2, 3 bonds. Nope, sorry, can't count. 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. And this oxygen would be making 1, 2 bonds. So everybody's happy. So I'm going to redraw those molecules of glucose. Yes, I know this is a pain in the anus, but that's kind of what drawing molecules is in the first place. Okay, so I'm going to leave my weird carbons alone, these ones that are sharing things, and I'm just going to draw in what's going on with my other ones. By the way, I know we have this awkward silence now. That's because I'm counting. You are too, probably, and now I'm messing you up. But if I'm going too fast, please feel free to pause the video. That's the whole reason we do the videos like this to begin with. All right. So now I've got my 2 glucoses, kind of exactly how I had them over here, only not dealing with this strange situation on these carbons. So it's worth noting that nothing happened to these 2 hydrogens. I didn't do anything to them. They get left alone. Okay, draw them back in. Now, we did talk about the way to solve this problem is to make this carbon and this carbon share this oxygen. So I'm going to draw that in. Okay, and I'm just going to make sure that things are looking okay now. This carbon makes 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. This carbon is making 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds, and this oxygen is making 2 bonds. Okay, now I have to show what I did with these molecules, the H2O. So when I'm writing a reaction like this, I have to add that in here. Your before and after picture needs to have the same number and type of atoms, and the only way to do that is to show what you did to create this. Okay, that is going to release 1 water molecule. So a condensation reaction releases a water molecule, and I want you to label this kind of bond, like wherever you have room. This is called a glycosidic bond. It's a special type of bond that results from a condensation reaction between 2 sugars. Glyco means sugar. So they share an oxygen. That's a special type of bond called a glycosidic bond. Okay, now we're going to practice the same type of reaction, a condensation reaction, but this time instead of between glucose, it's between amino acids. Don't worry, this one is easier, and we like that. Okay, so again, condensation reaction, bringing together by removing water. I'm going to need a before and after screen. So first I'm going to draw 2 amino acids. Here's my central carbon, a carboxyl group, an amine group, my R group, and a hydrogen. I'm going to do that on the other side. Okay, and so now I kind of have my before picture. I've got two horribly messy but somewhat functional amino acids. Okay, so again, I have to remove water in order to make a condensation reaction. So I need to figure out where that water is going to come from. Well, it's going to come from right here. Okay, so again, you don't have to draw this part, but in order to get my H2O, here's my H2, 2 H's, and here's an O. So again, my problem is now that nitrogen needs to form 3 bonds, 1, 2, and I've stolen its third, so it's 1 bond short. Carbon needs to form 4 bonds, 1, 2, 3, and I've stolen what it was bonded to for the 4th one. So now what's going to happen in order to fill in carbon's 4th bond and nitrogen's 3rd bond, don't draw this part, I'm just showing you something, is that we're going to make them bond together. Okay, so let's redraw that in the after scenario. Okay, so I'm going to kind of draw these the same way. Start with my central carbon. Okay, I'm not going to draw in that OH group because we're going to end up using that. Okay, but I never touched this amine group, so I'm going to leave that the same. Same with my R group and the hydrogen. And on this side, I never touched this carboxyl group, so it stays the same. And the only thing I did to the amine group was I stole one of the hydrogens off of there. The R group remains untouched, as well as this central hydrogen. Okay, now I'm going to draw in the bond between the carbon and nitrogen that I showed you. And I'm going to make a note to the reader that I have stolen or removed a molecule of water. So I'm going to say that this produced a molecule of water. Now, I want you to label this kind of bond. This special bond between 2 amino acids is called a peptide bond. This is how we get the name polypeptide, another name for a chain of amino acids. It comes from the peptide bond, and the peptide bond is always between the carbon from the carboxyl group and the nitrogen from the amine group. Okay, so it's a carbon-nitrogen bond. That's how you can find it, peptide bond. All right, so next let's work on a different kind of reaction called a hydrolysis reaction. Okay, the word lysis means to break. Hydro means water. We're going to break something using water. Okay, so this consumes water, and I should be going from a bigger molecule and breaking it down into a smaller one. So again, I'm going to separate my drawing into a before and after. Okay, so maltose is 2 glucoses stuck together. So I'm going to draw in a glucose. You should be getting really good at this by now. Also really tired of it. I'm aware of that. Sorry, this doesn't go here. Okay, so I'm going to leave this carbon alone because I know that has something to do with the bonding. And I'm going to draw in everything else. And I'm going to do the same on this side. Oops, I forgot a carbon over here earlier. No one told me. How rude. Okay, now if you remember from our condensation reaction of glucose, these two shared an oxygen. That was called a glycosidic bond. And again, this carbon also has a hydrogen on it. Okay, so here's a picture of maltose. It's 2 glucoses connected with a glycosidic bond. So what's going to happen is I'm going to try to add water, and I need to make a note of that in my diagram. I'm going to add water to this, and I'm going to insert that water right here because what I'm trying to do is restore the OH and OH groups. This O, if it stays with this carbon, needs an H. This carbon needs an OH group. Well, H plus OH gives me H2O. So I'm going to draw the after effect here. Okay, and basically the after effect is just two normal glucoses. Okay, so when you hydrolyze maltose, what you're doing is turning them back into glucoses. Okay, you are separating that maltose molecule into its normal glucoses. Does that make any sense? I have no idea. Maltose is two glucoses stuck together. Separate them. That's hydrolysis. Great. So here's the after picture. Okay. So what I've done, this oxygen has kind of gone back over here. Okay. This other one of these hydrogens is attached to it. So I can kind of color code this for you if you want. This oxygen was over here. So that's not new, okay? This hydrogen came from one of our water molecules, or sorry, the water molecule, one of the hydrogens. This oxygen came from the water molecule, and this hydrogen came from the other hydrogen in our water molecule. So that is hydrolysis of maltose. Okay, so here's the good news. If you're doing this for me, your assignment is now over. If I put something else at the bottom of your last page, that's my mistake, and I'm really sorry. You don't have to do that. And if not, that means you're doing this video after I've already fixed a mistake, and now I just look like an idiot for telling you I once made a mistake. But anyways, that's it for the video on drawing organic molecules. Happy practice.